Okay, so just short welcome and introduction from my side. My name is Jacek, and as a member of the Meet and Code team, I'd like to just briefly introduce you to the initiative and just say a few quick words about the project before we start with today's topic. But first, a very warm welcome from our partners, which is Stiftens, TechSoup Europe, SAP, and German Federal Ministry of the Interior. And welcome to our first Meet and Code online seminar of 2021. And if you're new, let me just tell you a bit about Meet and Code. Meet and Code was launched in 2017 to assist nonprofit organizations in providing digital skills education to young people aged between 8 and 24 years old across Europe. Now, 5 years on, Meet and Code has reached more than 175,000 young people across 35 European countries. So we are proud of that we share our, let's say, power across Europe. We can give the digital literacy and coding skills to just help the teenagers and young adults strive into tomorrow's competitive digital economy. And what Meet and Code do? Meet and Code awards microgrants of as much as 500 euros to local nonprofits to simply facilitate the workshops and classes they deliver. And many in our audience today will undoubtedly be recipients of those grants. And why have we launched the Meet and Code online seminars? The online seminars series is an extension of the Meet and Code commitment to simply help nonprofits become more innovative and creative in the work they do. They're designed to just simply inspire all of you, our Meet and Code community, with learnings and insights from SAP expert speakers and coaches in the exciting world of IT and coding. But let's introduce our amazing guests of today. We are delighted to have Birgit Hess with us today. And working as a security officer at SAP, Birgit is a fierce believer in the value of a necessity of data protection. She joined SAP in 2006, and during her career, she discovered her passion for protecting a fundamental human right, the right to data privacy. And since it would be much more interesting to hear directly from you, Birgit, a few words about yourself and maybe how this passion for data privacy started. I just want to say that we are honored, grateful, and hugely amazed that despite all of your commitments, you prioritized your time to be with us today. So let's just dive right into today's topic and learn more about data protection. Birgit, over to you.
Thank you so much. What a nice introduction. Now I feel honored that I can do this with you today. And as you said, I have a passion for this topic, and it's a bit funny because I don't have any background there. So I'm a bioengineer. I studied biology and then bioengineering many years back, and then for personal reasons, and that's just sometimes how life happens, I started work with SAP, and I worked in different roles, partner management and sales and so on. And then 7 years back, I stumbled over the topic data protection, and I was fascinated. I'm always saying I fell in love because it's a topic which is, as just mentioned, a fundamental human right. We have to ensure that our data is protected, because with the data we protect our people, we protect our personal rights. I will explain a bit later why and how this works, but that's an honor and a privilege that I have a job which I enjoy, working on a topic which is so important. And it has so many different facets and parts, and it's always changing, and you can always learn. And I'm a very curious person, and I hate doing all the time the same things over and over. I need a lot of input, and that's why I enjoy so much to work in this field, because it's never boring, never ever boring. Because with the technology changes, with the regulation changes, with the changes in society, we have to adapt also the way we protect our data. And that's why what I want to explain in the next couple of minutes, what this is, what it means for us, what it means for you in your different roles, and also what it means for this society overall, why it's so important to protect us and our data in a certain way. And so let's just dive in. Maybe you can see this little scratch figures. Those are my friends I'm always carrying with me. I'm sometimes drawing based on the people I see sitting and standing around with their mobile devices. And I often feel, especially the younger generation is even like grown into extended version, or the mobile device is grown into the extended version. So it's nothing which is kind of artificial or sometimes part of our life, but it's always there. And the Corona time, the last 12, 13, 14 months have shown us how much it is part of our life. And especially with all the virtual communication, with all the working from home and the virtualization, it's getting more and more important to ensure that we know how we can protect our data and ensure that our digital life isn't in danger. So let's just start to think about why this is important. What are all the questions coming up? I've given some of these presentations to NGOs in different countries, and I felt as a feedback from many people, it's very hard to grasp what the problem is. People are aware there is a problem, there are some problems, there are some regulations, there are some threats, there are some criminals trying to get my data, but it's so hard to really see what is the problem, how can I get hold of the problem, what data we are talking about, who attacks me, what am I allowed to do, what I'm not allowed to do, where do I start if I want to talk and understand how to handle my data appropriately, and how can I get help, who can help me. So I try to really break this down into the different areas over the next 25, 30 minutes, and then we hopefully have enough time also to answer your questions afterwards. As I'm sharing my screen, I cannot really see the chat, but I will certainly every now and then have a look at the chat, and we will have time to walk through the chat at the end of the session. And I will try to answer as much as I can. As mentioned, I'm a biologist, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a developer. I have a very broad knowledge about all these. I don't have the very deep knowledge. So if you are an expert in hacking, it might be that I'm not the right person to answer the question, but I can give you at least the big picture and where we have to focus on. So what's the problem? What exactly is the problem? There are two main things we have to consider. What kind of data we are working with, and what data really is at risk and why. And when we look at this, and this is a bit a very formalized slide, but it helps me and hopefully you to understand, there are two sides of this. The one side is the cybersecurity side, and the purpose of cybersecurity is to protect information against unauthorized access through computing environments. In companies, you have an information security officer responsible, and they want to ensure that no data is lost, deleted, or abused. So when you think of what happened, for example, in the United States just a couple of days ago, when there was a ransomware attack and a whole oil company was kind of shut down and couldn't deliver their business, there was a cybersecurity attack. There was a very clear attack on a target, and the data could no longer be used because it was encrypted. On the other side, we have data privacy. That's where the fundamental human rights come into play, because this is about me, it's about my personal rights. So data privacy should protect me as an individual in how my data is processed. And this has a lot to do with giving back control to me as the owner of the data, as the individual who the data belongs to, that I have control of what's happening to my data. We have seen a lot of these weird things happening, especially with famous people, where there were, I don't know, nude videos or sex tapes online which didn't belong to the people, where some private conversation was disclosed, where some people were really blackmailed, so their personal data wasn't shared. So this is really about me, protecting me as an individual. So the cybersecurity is about protecting data from loss, deletion, and abuse, and data privacy is about protecting me as a person. I can't see your faces, so I can't ask you to, I don't know, raise your hands, but this differentiation is so important because there are, on the one hand, different motives behind why we want to protect the data, and there are different regulations, different legal regulations behind why and how we have to protect data. You can have a perfect cybersecurity protection system in place and still violate data privacy obligations, or you can have a perfect data privacy framework in place and still not ensure that your data isn't lost or deleted or abused in a certain way. There is one overlapping area, which is the technical organizational measures, and we will get to them a little later. But they are kind of the glue which glues those two parts together. So let's first have a look at this cybersecurity and at the threat landscape. It's very funny when I talk to people and I ask them about cybersecurity and hackers and stuff. A lot of people still have this in mind that there's some guy with a hoodie in the basement of his mom doing hacking. And often people tell me, well, it's very unlikely that I get a victim of such a hacker, because why should he or she know about me? But is it true? Are these some crazy hackers sitting somewhere in the basement? And the answer is not really. Of course, there are still some of these guys who take pleasure in being smarter than the FBI, or I don't know, hacking somewhere and someone and to boast in their communities. But the bigger part is really organized crime, which is very astonishing for me, for example, when you think of it. In 2019, in the United States, there was more money made by unlawfully collected data than by drugs. The same for in Germany, you could make more money with stealing data than with stealing cars. So it's a huge economy, and you have organized crime focusing on this type of criminal activity. And so we don't have a hacker targeting me as an individual, but we have groups who have the power, who have the capacity to launch huge attacks using artificial intelligence, using a strong computer power to really violate data sets and attack companies and also attack individuals. And last year in Germany, for example, there was an attack on a hospital, which resulted in the first really human casualty, because a woman couldn't get into the hospital. She had to be transported to the next hospital and she died on the way. So it's really, literally someone died because of hack. And this is way beyond, I don't know, a ransomware attack, or way beyond the famous Prince of Zamunda asking me for some money so he can leave the country. So this is really a very, very different quality. And why do they want to have the data? Why is it interesting for them to have the data? There are also very different motives. The one motive, of course, is just to destroy, create destruction, fear, a very more a terroristic approach. Then there's also a lot of money in data. And this is my most famous saying is, if you don't pay for it for something in the internet, so if it's for free, if it doesn't cost anything, it costs your data. So whenever you download an app or you use a service and it's for free, then you can be sure it costs your data. And this is because data is very valuable. I'm sure you have heard this saying of data is the new oil and data is the new gold. And for criminals, it's very interesting to also get hold of a lot of data to manipulate, but also to create profiles, to sell it to companies, to sell it to advertisement companies, but also to insurance companies, retail companies, what have you. So it's not only about destruction, but it's also about making money with the data you steal. And that's why we have these different approaches from hackers, how to get hold of data. When we think about the methods they apply, they're very diverse, but some standard methods we can summarize. One is classic hacking. So someone is trying to get into your system and trying to, I don't know, go through your firewall and put a worm or whatever in your system, a virus, and this is really attacking your system. The next one, and this goes together with the one afterwards, is it's so-called pretexting. And pretexting means that someone is trying to find out as much as possible about you to ensure that whatever he or she is attacking you with is very targeted. And these attacks often happen via so-called phishing mails. I'm pretty sure a lot of you have heard about phishing mails. Those are the mails you get which are not official, which are fake. They have links in it, they have attachments in it, and when you click on them, you can get viruses on your computer, you can get your computer encrypted, like with ransomware. That's when you have a piece of software on your computer is encrypting, and you have to pay some bitcoins to get the key to reverse the encryption, or sometimes just encrypting and destroying your data on your computer. And pretexting is using all of the social media information, all the information available in the internet to ensure that the way you are attacked is very, very targeted. And this is called spear phishing. And my most favorite and famous example is a group of salespeople, not from SAP, but from another company, were on a little boat trip. So they were doing canoeing or kayaking, I don't remember, on a little river. And they were posting a photo on LinkedIn, and it says, the team was called the Wet Sox, not the Red Sox, but the Wet Sox. The Wet Sox in our company research and development sit in one boat. So that was the title of the picture, and they posted it and they tagged all the people which were part of this whole thing. And after a day or two, the people who had been tagged on the photo received an email. It was from the company who had organized the boat trip. And it said, please find attached some pictures. Thanks for joining us. We were happy to have you. And as you can imagine, because otherwise I wouldn't tell the story, it was a fake email. The point was, on the picture, you could see the point where the people left the river. It showed the name of the company who had organized the trip, because they had their little sign there with some marketing information. So they had the name of the company organizing the trip. They had the name of the people, and as many companies, you have first name, point, last name, ad, and the company as an email address. So they had a targeted email. They already had some information how the team was called, where this took place, when it took place. So they could create a very good spear phishing mail. And these people all clicked on the link because they wanted to download the picture, and nothing happened. And I didn't think about it. And fortunately, there was one guy who was in cybersecurity, and he, after a day, felt a bit odd about that. And then they started the investigation, and they had some software on the system which would have then, after a while, spied out the company. But it started very, very basic, very unsuspicious, just posting a picture. But it was enough to create a very, very strong spear phishing attack. And what I have experienced, especially working with kids and younger adults, is they are used to share a lot about themselves, but they are not really in the mindset to understand that this makes them very vulnerable. Because the more you share, the more targeted the attack can be. And not only like for girls telling them, don't tell people where you are because you can get abducted, but also like everybody sharing a lot about themselves, making them very easy targets, because the attacker can be very convincing. And this is not about, again, someone sitting in the basement, but about a big data lake, collecting data from all these different sources and having an AI which is matching the different aspects of the data into a profile and then automatically sending a mail. So this is not about me being a target because someone has me in mind already, but this is about an organized crime using AI to launch thousands and thousands of these targeted attacks by reusing data which has been shared in social media. So when you work with your kids and with the young adults in your Meet and Code seminars, also make them aware that sharing is not only about sharing your personality and what it can do to you as a person growing up, but it makes you an easier target also for this type of attacks. And this, at least I felt, is sometimes more convincing for the kids not to share too much, because this is the concept they get. They know there are criminals out there who want to steal data. And it's more tangible than thinking of me, how I would feel when I'm 25 about my TikTok video when I was 15. So that's I think something we all can try to convey as a message, to be more careful with sharing personal facts out there, and also company facts. So when we now, what we can do, look at what we can do. There are very, very few things which would really ensure that we never get attacked. There's nothing like a 100% secure system. Even if you spend all the money, it will never be 100% secure. There's something which is called the security triangle. You have money, usability, and security. So the more money you spend and the more secure you make a system, the less usable it will be. And the more usable and more secure you want to make it, the more money you have to spend. And I think you get the message. So there is a logical limit to how secure you can make things, but there are some very basic things. And I experience with working with associations that those basic things are often, because of all the other things we have to think about, are kind of forgotten or a bit left behind. And one is, for example, to ensure that you have adequate hardware and software. Because if your software is old, if your hardware is old, if you don't have backups, so you cannot ensure that there is an additional version of the data, even if your whole system gets encrypted and you have a backup somewhere which is not connected to your existing hardware, you still have your data there. So if you have adequate hardware and software, this already can help you. And as we all rely on funds, it sometimes makes a good case when you try to raise funds to also say, this is also to secure the data. This is also to ensure not only that we have a fancy computer and that, I don't know, we all have iPads or whatever, but it's also to make things more secure, to ensure that it's more secure. Regular software update. This is one of my favorite ones. I used to be very hesitant with the updates because I learned the hard way when I was younger, that when you were the first one doing the update, you were the first one to really scream and run through your room and shout because everything was screwed up. But now, with all what's going on, we have to ensure that we are up to date with software updates, because with all the backdoors and all the disclosure of weaknesses, which can be shared in these communities in milliseconds, it is a bit like having a house and putting a sign on your lawn that your back door isn't closed, and just wait if someone would come by and just get into your house. So whenever something happens, when there is a weakness, when there is an exploit, we have to ensure that we use whatever gets shipped, gets patched, and update our software, even though it might sometimes be scary because we feel, okay, it might screw up and my computer is going slowly and I have another system, depending on the original system. If I do the update, the other system might not work anymore, but the risk is huge if you don't go with the software updates, with the patches, because it means you put the sign on your lawn telling people, you know what, just come in, I haven't closed the door. Everybody knows that this house has this door and that's how you can get it. The third is, mentioned a bit earlier, regular data backups. For me, it's very astonishing when I work with people outside of very big corporations, even mid-sized companies, how few people think about data backup as individuals anyway, but also as companies. We have this one computer which is in the basement of a friend and they have all the data. And if they are on vacation, then bad luck. This is inconvenient, but if the data is gone, it's not only inconvenient, it's dangerous. And we will get there why this is also dangerous from a compliance perspective, from a regulation perspective, not only from a technical perspective. So my recommendation is think before you share, means before you share information about yourself, ensure that you think about what you share. Does it make you vulnerable? Does it make your organization vulnerable? Think before you click. That's one of my favorite, because we have a very good gut feeling. We have a very good feeling if something's odd. We just haven't learned to listen to it. I could do a whole speech from my biology background why our mammalian brain is smarter than our human brain in recognizing these patterns, but we don't have time today. But if you feel it's weird, listen to your gut. 99% it's right. So this is from a security perspective. Remember, we said we also want to talk about data privacy, which is the other part of the house. It's protecting individual data. data of people, protecting the rights of people. And this is something where regulators come into play. And usually when regulators come into play, it's getting cumbersome and difficult, because all regulations, being it laws in the country or in Europe or in any other community, are compromises, and compromises tend to be very complex because people want to find a way how everybody's happy or everybody's unhappy. My grandfather used to say good compromises when everybody's unhappy. But the point is that it usually gets very difficult when you try to implement regulations. So again, the question, what do I have to do? Where can I get help? And the biggest regulation, which would be relevant, I think, also for most of the people in this call, is the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. So the European General Data Protection Regulation. But there can also be country-specific data protection regulation. There can be specific regulations for specific data. If you work with health data, with finance data, you can have additional regulation. So to apply all these regulations can be a huge job. You might need a lawyer, you might need someone to help you to understand what you have to do. And I'm not the one telling you what to do, but I want to give you an idea how to understand the concept, and maybe then how to ask the smart questions which will help you to address these problems in your organization, in your association. The concept is the following. There's an individual, it's a wonderful word in lawyer speech, is the data subject. And this data subject has certain rights. We talked about that the data of her is protected. Then we have the so-called data processor. This is the person who, or the company or the system which is processing the data. And this data processor has responsibilities, obligations towards the data subject. And these obligations are very clearly defined in the way that the data processor, so whoever's processing data, so whoever's collecting data, storing data, changing data, displaying data, processing is a lot of things. So whenever data is involved, it's kind of processing data. This part has to ensure that the rights of the data subject are treated in the right way. So it's not me as an individual that I have to ensure that these guys do their job, but they have to ensure. And that was a big change when GDPR came into play, that the whole responsibility more moved towards the people who process the data, because it's a big business and companies collect a lot of data. So they should also have the responsibility to ensure that it's done right. On the other hand, it made the job of smaller companies and associations and NPOs and NGOs very difficult. The concept was developed more to protect this group from the big corporations and not to make life very difficult for smaller companies or for associations. But the way this data processor has to protect the data is defined in certain ways, like notification, deletion, correction, information. We will go into that in a second. But the concept for me is very, very important. The moment you start collecting data in a meet and code event, for example, you take on responsibility similar to when you would do an on-site camp and you would have the kids there and you have to ensure there's a firefighter concept and there are, I don't know, is water so no one is getting a heat stroke. It's the same concept, even if it's only data, the same concept. You take on a certain part of the responsibility, and this cannot be moved away, or you cannot say, I don't know about that, or I don't feel comfortable with it. That's the law, that's the regulation we have to apply. So what's the legal basis? I'm sorry for these terms, but I think it helps on the long run. So the first legal basis from GDPR, and we take it as an example because it's the most advanced regulation there is, lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. Thinking of my data subject perspective, this is nice. So someone is ensuring that my data is, first of all, lawfully processed. It's fair, so I understand what's happening. They don't try to hide it in lengthy descriptions or, I don't know, sneak it behind my back. They make transparent what they do with it. So this is actually a good thing. The purpose limitation means if you collect data from me, because I'm part of a meet and code event, I don't allow you to take the same data and sell it to Disney so they can create an advertisement for me. There's a purpose limitation. The data has a certain purpose. I collect it for a certain purpose, and it has to stay within a certain purpose. Only when I, as a data subject, say, no, it's okay, you can use it for whatever you want. That's a different story, but it should be very clearly defined why I'm collecting this data. Data minimization. So what kind of data do I collect? Do I really need all the information? Do I need the hobbies, the hair color, the eye color, number of siblings, whatever? Do I need this? Or should I not minimize the data I collect from a person? Because the less I have, the easier it is to protect the data and the less risk it is that something gets disclosed. Accuracy. So if I put somewhere in my name is Birgit Hess and someone says, no, it's Sabine Hess, and I don't get on a flight because they are not able to correct my name, then I have the right to put pressure on this, for example, airplane company to ensure that they change my name because it's my name. I have the right that they put it accuracy in their system. Storage limitation. So it cannot be there forever. There has to be a day either when there's no purpose anymore. So if they don't need it for this, then they have to delete it. Or if there's another reason why they have to delete the data, I have to ensure that it stays there as long as I want it to stay there, or other legal obligations make the data to stay there. For example, at a hospital, my data has to stay there. Even if I tell them, please delete my data, they will say, I have to keep a certain subset because if something's happening to you, we have to ensure maybe if the hospital was at fault or you or whatever. So there's a storage limitation. Integrity, confidentiality. If I collect data about you, I cannot just take the data and go next door and show it to someone else. I have to ensure it's confidential. It's personal data. I don't share your birthday or your hair color or your, I don't know, your religion, even your gender to everybody else, because it's confidential. I have to ensure that it stays confidential. Accountability, make clear who's accountable, the picture I showed before. So who is accountable from a processor perspective, but also within the group, who is allowed to take the data, who is allowed to store the data. So if something's happening, I can go back and easily find out who did something wrong. So from my perspective, if I'm an association, what do I have to do? Why do I have to pay attention to this? And what do I have to pay attention to? Sorry. What kind of data do I collect? My most favorite picture here is if you go collecting mushrooms, usually you don't take your basket and just collect every mushroom you can find in the forest, make a smoothie, and then just cross your fingers and hope you haven't had a poisonous one. But you go in the forest and you pick the ones you know you want to put in your food, and then you start making them, processing them. For whatever reason, we tend to collect everything because we might use it, and then put it in one box, and then start trying to figure out what data is still relevant for us. So let's always consider, what kind of data do I collect? Am I allowed to collect the data? For example, if I want to collect health data, so if I want to make a camp, an on-site camp, and I need to know what allergies the kids have, this is a very sensitive information because it can, if it gets into the wrong hands, have an influence of the life of the kid or the adult. So do I really need this, or can I ensure that this information maybe is disclosed on site, and I don't know, put all the allergy information on the menu plan, and then the kid and the parent have to ensure that it's not taking the wrong food. So I don't have to store this kind of information in my systems because they have to be protected more vigilantly. And also, and this is something a bit newer, when you think of when you have these kind of forms where you put names in, do you have to put the title in? So if it's a Mr. or Mrs. or in diverse, because now diverse also exists, especially in Germany. I'm not sure about other countries in Europe, but I know especially in Germany, you have these forms where you can select diverse. Diverse can be an indicator of the sexual orientation of the person, because it can lead to the assumption that the person who picks diverse might be a transgender. In some companies, this is a very dangerous information about you. If you're transgender, you might end up in jail, or even worse. So a simple title, Mr. and Mrs. or Miss and she or he or whatever, can already be a sensitive information. So why do we have to collect it? Why it's important for us to know it? Maybe I don't have to have this in there. Maybe I don't have to have the information if I if someone's writing to me and the title says, Dear Birgit Hess, that's okay. It doesn't have to say Dear Mrs. Hess or Dear Miss Hess or Dear Mr. whatever. It's okay. It's my first name, last name, and I don't need to disclose what kind of gender I have, if I have a diverse or if I have a certain orientation. So just thinking about if it's really necessary. So why do I need this data? This is also for the purpose. So why do I need it? How long do I need it? What am I allowed to do with it? Really to ensure, can I share it? Can I publish it on a website? Can I don't know, use pictures and names on our collaterals? Really, before you collect the data, before you start sharing the data, really considering what you are allowed to do. How long can I keep the data? As I mentioned, when the purpose is gone, when it's for a certain event and I don't need it anymore, I have to delete it, because why should I keep it? First of all, I'm not allowed. And second of all, it makes just my life more difficult. And when do I have to delete data? There are a lot of regulations, especially from a finance perspective and a health perspective, which make me keep data. So also when I collect data and when I have data, I have to keep in mind when I have to delete it. So I'm sorry, that was a lot of information. I know, a lot of like lawyer talk. I hope it was still possible for you to follow me. But those are the principles. Those are the things which are important. And when we now go back to the picture from the cybersecurity and data privacy, for example, in GDPR in the data protection regulation, how to protect this data is defined in the so-called TOMs, the technical organizational measures. Try to say that 5 times in a row. It's a tongue tie. And we have a very brief look. I don't want to confuse you on the TOMs, because they define how to protect the data. So we just talked about why we have to protect the data, and now we should talk about how to protect the data. So physical control, who can get into the room where I have my computer or my server, who can access the system, who can access the data. Data transmission control means when I don't know, send a list of names in an Excel to someone else via mail and it's not encrypted, then the transmission, so the transfer of data from one place to another, can be a risk. This data can be captured and misused. So is there a more secure way? Maybe can I use the Excel and put a password and send 2 different mails? Can I encrypt it? Can I maybe call the person, say, I'm telling you the password on the phone and I'm sending you the Excel file with a password, something like that. Really, also when you send data, keep it in mind. Maybe also use cloud sharing tools which have encryption methodology where you share data instead of only using email, because a non-encrypted email is like a postcard. You can just take it and read it if you're up to it. It's not difficult. Data input control means who can put data in. So who can maybe also manipulate data, who can change a birthday, who can, I don't know, change a favorite food, who can, I don't know, understand how siblings are related. Job control is a bit too complex. I don't want to go into detail with that. It has to do with understand afterwards who had access. So if something's happening, that we can figure out who was at fault. Availability control. If I provide data about myself, I want to ensure that it's available. Because if, for example, I'm booking a flight and my information disappears, I'm in the right. I can tell the company, hey, I booked it, I have a receipt in my email, and if you lose my data, it's your fault, it's not my fault. So availability control, ensure that the data is available. Data separation means if you work with different groups, ensure you have different buckets of data. When you share, for example, the list of members of one meet and code event, don't mix it with a list of other members of another meet and code event if the people who receive the data don't have like the same purpose of seeing the data. If it's a different event and different people you work with, don't have a huge list, just 2 separate lists, sending them separately. Sure, a lot of you are already doing that, but sometimes it's important to also consider why this has to be done. In data integrity, we talked about that to ensure that it's right. So it's not Sabine Hess, but it's Birgit Hess, so I'm not getting mixed up with someone else. Good. Where do I start? I read a nice quote on one of the communities I'm part of, which says GDPR and data protection regulations weren't done for non-corporations, and it's true. It was done to control corporations, like Facebook and Google and what have you, and Amazon, but they were made in huge sizes. So they were made for big companies, and smaller companies and associations really, really struggle. But the good part is, I talk to a lot of these people which are part of the authorities. In Germany, there are, even for each sub-country we have, there are specific data protection authorities. They want to help. They want to help NGOs, NPOs, associations. They are not interested in making your life miserable. So usually if you reach out to these authorities, they help you to understand where you can start. There's the GDPR website. I've put the link in here. It's very cumbersome, but there you can ask questions. And they're very nice in answering, especially when you come back and say, I have an event or I plan to launch a website. You just write to them. Usually they're really, really helpful. Some countries have specific NGO support organizations which focus on the needs of NGOs or NPOs or whatever associations regarding data protection. There are even some lawyer companies who do pro bono work for them and ensure that the website is done properly, that the data protection statement is done properly. So you don't have to do it all by yourself. There is help. So when we think about that and we have time for questions, oh, my summary slide. Here's my summary slide. When we think about it, it's really a couple of things you should keep in mind, if you like. It's the difference between IT security and data protection, which might also be for you important to say, I have someone who's really good at data security, who's taking care of securing my systems and secure my platforms. And as you are in the Meet and Code community, I assume you have a lot of people who also have this kind of mindset, or at least you have an easier way to get this kind of mindset, but also have someone who's more familiar with data protection, who understands the law, who understands the regulations, what kind of proofs you might need if someone is investigating. Keep the technical security in mind, as I said, hardware, updates, patches, don't just leave this and hope for the best. Decide what data is really needed. This I cannot emphasize often enough. Ensure when you start collecting data, especially when it's sensitive data and data from kids, do you really need all this information? Limit it to as minimum as possible, because the less you have, the less the risk is. Consider the TOMS means just, you get the slides afterwards, you can just scan through and think, oh, do I have anything which is applying this kind of organizational measure? Check with our authorities and don't give up, even if it sounds very complex, even if I just talked for, I think, 35 or 40 minutes. You can get there. Get help, ask for help. Be more conservative and rather don't collect the data, or think twice before you collect the data, but don't give up. It's not impossible to protect your data. It's impossible to protect it 100%, but some small steps already go a very, very long way. Okay, so that was my presentation, and now I really want to ensure that we have time for questions.
Birgit, thank you so much for those words, for those lessons. And I must say that even I, as an example of a person practically raised in the technology era, I tend to forget about all the simple do's and don'ts that you mentioned. And it's so good to be reminded about just being careful and, as you said, think twice about everything. But we are fortunate to have Birgit with us for a few minutes longer. So if some of you have any questions, any concerns about data privacy, just type the questions into the chat and we'll try to answer all of them.
Yeah.
So just let's wait.
I hope I didn't overwhelm you with all the information. I know it's a lot.
No, Birgit, it was really inspiring. Because, you know, like, I think that most of us think they know about data privacy and being secure in the internet. But when we hear some very specific information, as you mentioned, it's like, no, I do not know anything about that. Yeah. So it's so good to have you here.
Okay. And as I said, really important, don't give up. I mean, at some point, I have witnessed a lot of people saying, oh, it's too difficult and I don't want to do it and I just drop it. It's too dangerous. I get in trouble. That's not true. As I said, especially the authorities, also in the EU-wide authorities, they want to help. They don't want to shut down this type of organizations with these rules. They just want to ensure that the bigger fish in the pond play according to the rules, and not that they can collect and do with the data what they want. We joked earlier that we should have a whole session on how this kind of data collection is happening and how you can protect yourself, or what kind of systems are a bit tricky. But for this type of organizations you work with, really, this is not to make your life miserable. It's really to ensure that you can do what you do best to help the kids and also protect them and protect yourself.
I think that while we wait, I might have one question, maybe a bit lower level than you, about what you said. But what do you think is the biggest danger, the biggest threat that we face daily while scrolling our social media profiles or doing some basic web surfing? What is the most common and still dangerous thing that we tend to omit and do not think about? Like the very simple thing.
I think usually the point is that we are so used to jump from website to website that we never really look at what kind of website we are on. So you start on, I'm just saying Facebook, disclosing me as an old person now. You start on Facebook and there is a link to, I don't know, some sort of advertisement. So you go on the advertisement link because you think the shirt is fun. And then on this, there pops up another picture with a cute video. And then you click on that, and then you get on a YouTube video. And then from there, you get on another website. And you lose track because you don't, usually you can see your browser's telling you, careful, it's not an HTTPS, or we want to block the website. And we just are so used to follow and follow and follow that we don't think that it might be like the famous carrot someone is putting in front of my nose, just trying to get me. The Swedes, you try to get the kids into the van. That's how they do it. They just trail you. And the second biggest one is really when you receive mails, that we underestimate the effort which can, or the power which can be used to create this perfect spearfishing mails. I got fished myself twice. It's embarrassing, but it was so well done that I just clicked, and then the blank page came and I was like, oh my God, oh. Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah. But that's a good point. I didn't put it on the slide. Usually I put it on the slide. I have to edit. The third risk is that you don't tell anybody because you're embarrassed. You make a mistake and you don't tell anybody. And the worst attack is the one you don't know about, because the solar wind, I'm not sure if you heard about the solar wind attack in the States. It went on for 7 months. 7 months, it was in hiding. And there were people feeling that something was wrong, but they didn't do anything about it because they thought, oh, maybe I clicked on the wrong, So never hide. It can happen to everybody. If you share, if you disclose, if you search for help, then you can solve the problem, which otherwise would be like cancer. It would just grow. It's like when you don't get the mole checked. It's not getting well.
But you're right. I think that we all have right now some sort of notion that we should have known that. So yeah. I'm not gonna say it to anyone because we should have known that.
Yeah, and they build on that. They build on this shame trigger. That's something they're very good at. Usually all the phishing mails have a lot of pressure and fear in it, because then your brain works differently. Your amygdala starts working and your prefrontal cortex shuts down. You cannot think rationally, you just think emotionally, and you do all these stupid things. And then afterwards you wonder why you were so stupid, but it's basic brain function which tricked you. And that's what they do. They play with this kind of games.
Birgit, from what I can see, I think that you, I wanted to say that you're so explicit and specific that we have no questions, but here's the question. So what parental control programs would you advise for personal experience for Android?
That's a good question. I used to have, my son is 17 now, so I'm a bit out of the parental control. Can we share this afterwards? Because there's something from the EU which is pretty nice, which works on all the devices. I know Apple has a control system like implemented, but there is one which is like officially sanctioned by the EU, which is quite nice for all the other systems. I can search for the link and I can provide it. also maybe we can then provide, there are some links where you can also learn how kids can surf safely on the internet and all this stuff. There is a lot of information out there, how to secure a device and so on and so forth. I have collected some links. Maybe I can just put them on the end of my slide deck.
That would be great. Do we have any other questions? Guys, that's your last chance to. But very good. As you can see, no questions, a clear point of view, and very interesting explanations of details. As I said, people agree.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Inspiring.
It was a pleasure. I hope you can use some of the information, and at the end of the slide, you can also see my LinkedIn connection. So feel free to also connect with me and reach out if you have questions. Happy to help.
Great. I think that's great that all of our today's participants will get the presentations to revisit all the information, because it was super packed. Even I want to revisit it after the webinar. But as for right now, I would like to super thank you, Birgit, for being here with us today. And big thanks to our partners, and especially you, our Meet and Code audience, for your time and attention this afternoon. We have enjoyed hosting you, and I hope you walk away with a feeling of a bit more inspired and motivated to stay safe in the internet. We look forward to seeing you again at the next Meet and Code online seminar. So remember to just follow us on our social media to